Welcome to Focus on Africa. I am Peter Okwoche, live from Glasgow on the last official day of the COP26 summit. Now, earlier today, another draft document was released, but does it fall short on the reduction of the emission of fossil fuels? The document, though, does ask for more detail on how quickly countries are going to meet these cuts. I've been speaking to a youth activist here in Glasgow who says world leaders are not listening.
They're not listening because if they were listening, they would not just listen to us, but they would be acting on our demands.
And I'm Sophie Ikenya in London. Also in the program, the top-ranking U.S. military official in Africa tells us that the fall of Addis Ababa to rebel forces in Ethiopia could spark a humanitarian tragedy.
Anything that happens within Ethiopia is inextricably tied to the security, the safety of the rest of the region.
Sudan's deposed civilian leadership has rejected a new transitional ruling council set up by the leader of last month's coup.
Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa. We're coming to you live from the exhibition centre in Glasgow on what is effectively the last official day of the COP26 summit that's been taking place here for the last 2 weeks. Now, earlier today, yet another draft document was released. A lot of people here saying that in some instances it's been watered down, and in other instances the language has been strengthened. For instance, the document calls for countries all across the world to quickly reiterate how quickly, rather, they will be cutting down on fossil fuel emissions across their regions. Now, some of the most visible participants here at these talks have been young activists. They've come from all across the globe, demanding that their voices be heard. One of them was the young Kenyan activist, Elizabeth Wazuti. She made an impassioned plea to world leaders on the opening day of this summit, which seems like such a long time ago, asking that they listen to young people.
I believe in our human capacity to care deeply and to act collectively. I believe in our ability to do what is right if we let ourselves feel it in our hearts. The children cannot live on words and empty promises. They are waiting for you to act. Please open your hearts and then act.
Well, I did catch up with Elizabeth Wazuti, and I began by asking her if indeed world leaders were now listening.
The leaders say that they hear us, but the only thing we are seeing at COP26 is the leaders recognizing that we have gaps on emissions reduction, that we have gaps on finance, that we have gaps on loss and damage, but none of them is willing to step up to fill those gaps, which tells us that they're not listening, because if they were listening, they would not just listen to us, but they would be acting on our demands.
When you talk about immediate solutions, acting immediately, some people believe that is quite naive, and that naivete comes with youth. You know, that if you're in a position of power, in a position to be the leader of a country, you will understand that these changes can only be gradual. What's your response to that?
We are in a climate emergency, and this is about people's lives, people's livelihoods. And on Monday, when I was speaking to the leaders, I appealed to them to find it in themselves, to feel the heartbreak and the injustices that have gone into the climate crisis. And the truth of the matter is the countries that are least responsible and that have the least historical emissions are the ones that are suffering the biggest impacts of the climate crisis. So we cannot afford to say that it's gradual. It has to happen right now.
In the past 1 week, we've reached deals on reducing the use of methane gas, reducing the use of coal, which is a major contributor to global warming. About 100 countries have now signed a deal to say they will stop deforestation by 2030, something that I know that you're very passionate about because you plant a lot of trees in your home country, Kenya. Do you think that progress has been made, or is this just too little?
They are not enough to help us keep 1.5 alive, and that's the highlight of it, that even the pledges they are putting forward are not enough. And even the previous pledges that have been made, for example, for climate finance, they have still not been fulfilled till now. And we are seeing countries trying to get themselves out of commitments that they made. So it's not a time when we can say that significant progress has been made, because even what has been previously promised has not been fulfilled right now.
It takes a while to phase out fossil fuel. It takes a while to stop the use of plastics. I know that they've stopped the use of plastics in Kenya now. That you guys just don't understand the fundamentals, that maybe as young activists, you guys need to stop shouting and listen a bit.
I do not have as much resources as maybe a president would have, but I do what I do in my country. I work with children, I grow trees, I demand for action at the same time. So we are not just, they call it shouting, but we are not just doing that. We are also trying to work with our communities back at home to help them understand about the climate crisis and to also help them see if they can somehow be able to deal with the impacts.
Would your time be better spent, and maybe your fight for this fight against climate change be won easier if maybe you change tack, and rather than, you know, as they say, shout about climate change, maybe you went into political activism instead, you know, encouraging young people in Kenya to go out and vote during the next elections to make sure that they have the right leaders in place. I mean, that is something that former US President Obama has said quite a few times, and even at this COP conference, that hashtags on social media may get you awareness. But for real political change, young people need to go out and vote.
We cannot allow the leaders to get away with inaction. This is about demanding accountability. They are in those positions of power because the citizens believe in them to do what's supposed to be done. And if they do not, the citizens have every right to demand accountability, to demand for them to take action.
A last question for you. From a youth activist's point of view, has COP26 been a success?
We are all saying that, yes, we need climate action. The leaders are joining us in saying we need climate action, but we are asking them to step up and fill the gaps that they are recognizing exist. And I think if those gaps wouldn't have been filled by the end of COP26, then it might be, well, another failed COP, which we don't want it to happen.
So I'm gathering that your answer to that question is no.
It's a no. For now, it's a no.
Well, despite that cynicism from the likes of the Kenyan activist Elizabeth Wazuti there, the US climate envoy John Kerry has been speaking to the BBC today. He says that he believes that a deal will be reached, and it will be a very important deal. He also said that his home country, the United States, would be willing to put more money on the table to help developing countries overcome the effects of climate change.
Less developed countries desperately need additional help. We agree with that. From day one at this COP, we've been saying the United States wants to raise the amount for adaptation. We support it, and we'll be moving in the right direction, I believe, as we leave here.
Well, despite those assurances from Mr. Kerry, a lot of the activists here still don't believe that much will be done. Mr. Kerry himself has actually been speaking to the youth activists here, and one of the people that he sat down for a meeting with is a young activist from Zambia, Rebecca Nkunde, who's a school teacher, and I asked her what exactly it was that they wanted from the US.
As an organization, we wanted a platform where we engage with the people that are involved in the top decision-making positions, and that was one of them. We really wanted to have our views, and also to just clear the air on the fact that most of the zones or the discussions and the negotiations that are taking place, I as an observer is not allowed in there, and as a young person. So we wanted to really find out, why are we not on the table with them? Why is it so hard to have access to those places? And also, what is their plan for us? Are they in any way interested in doing anything to involve the youth in these negotiations.
A lot of the talk I've been hearing from young activists like yourself here at this COP26 meeting has been around the fact that, and you just mentioned it, that you've not been at the table, that you don't think world leaders are listening to you, or leaders of developed countries are listening to you. Did you challenge Mr. Kerry on that?
Yes, I did, and his response was actually in favor of what we stand for. He said there are so many things that they're doing and discussions that they're having that are around youth involvement, and that there's a lot of representation in the decision-making meetings that they're having. And he just expressed to say he feels our pain, he feels what we feel, because at some point he was in our shoes and he was a youth like us. He was also involved in such protests.
That's the Zambian activist Rebecca Nkunde. Now, Madagascar is one of the countries most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The small island nation this year was declared to have the first ever climate change caused, first ever famine rather, caused by climate change. The country's environment minister, Minister for Sustainable Development, has also been speaking to the BBC, and he says even ordinary people have to do their own bit in the fight against climate change.
We are here also to say that we have to really change our way of life, and rich countries should really change many things. The post-crisis COVID-19 won't never be the same than before. We should take into account our global footprint, but also how we consume, how we produce. So we really need to decrease considerably our global footprint and the greenhouse emissions. And it is a matter of habit, of political decision, but also from citizens. So we need to really remind the citizens from the rich countries that we need to do sacrifice. The planet needs us to do sacrifice. So the idea is also for Madagascar to be able not to have the same pathways than the rich countries. So less use of oil, and also produce locally, think about our habits, everyday habits, but also taking care of our forests and biodiversity.
So that's Madagascar's Minister for Environment and Sustainable Development. Let's talk to one man now who's been involved in these talks all week, for the duration of the summit, and even before that. He is the Tanzanian environmental specialist representing developing countries at the negotiating table. He's also the co-chair of the Adaptation Fund. Dr. Richard Muyungi, great to have you on the program again. You've been involved in these discussions. How far have you got?
Well, the 2 weeks have been long, endless nights. As you noted, there are drafts already out in few areas. We still have some areas where we haven't reached an agreement. As you noted, I've been supporting the presidency on negotiations related to climate finance. This remains one area where we haven't reached an agreement so far. Issues related to the commitments made by heads of states at the beginning of our meetings, and how we translate that into real money, real action.
So do we know when this money is going to be on the table? Because for African countries, for countries of least developing nations, this is the most important thing.
Indeed, this is the most important thing, and this is what we have been discussing. The 100 billion, which was promised by 2020, has not been on the table so far. We have pushed the debate on that to 2022. There are those who want up to 2025, but in reality, this is not all we need now. If you look at the national determined contributions reports from developing countries, they need over $7 trillion now to address climate change. Africa alone needs about $5 trillion.
So we're moving now from 100 billion to $5 trillion. Is there any expectation at all that this money will be made available?
This is the issue. The 100 billion hasn't been made available so far. We do not expect that money will be made available, and that will translate into less action.
If that money is not made available, does that mean that COP26 has been a failure, at least for African countries and least developed countries?
If there won't be an agreement on at least showing us when that money will be made available, even the 100 billion, that would be a failure.
When are we going to get the final document?
I can't tell. I'm just in the negotiations.
Okay.
Maybe in the next 7 hours, in the middle of the night. But as Africa, we do believe that the only way we call this a COP, a successful COP, will be when it translates to real money and getting that money.
Dr. Richard Mungy there. So the negotiations are still going on. And Sophie, just a small footnote for you. The next COP meeting will be taking place in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh next year. Back to you in the studio.
All right, Peter Okwoche there for us. Thank you. Thank you. Now, still to come, the top-ranking U.S. military official in Africa tells us that the fall of Addis Ababa to rebel forces in Ethiopia could plunge the region into chaos. Welcome back. You're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The United States top-ranking military official in Africa says the fall of Addis Ababa to rebel forces in Ethiopia could cause a humanitarian tragedy. Major General William Zana has expressed concern that the year-long conflict in Ethiopia could have a significant regional impact. He is also concerned about possible military actions by Sudan and Egypt against the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam as the country's instability deepens. General Zana spoke to the BBC's senior Africa correspondent Anne Soy in Camp Lemonnier in the American military base in Djibouti.
I think in Ethiopia, my great concern is anything that happens within Ethiopia is inextricably tied to the security, the safety of the rest of the region. When Ethiopia has an internal conflict that may make it decide to withdraw forces from Somalia, now you have 5 African Union countries that are also affected, and Somalia. You have the potential for violent extremist organizations to have greater activity there. We also see enduring conflicts or points of tension. The border conflict between Sudan and Ethiopia, that risks of that turning, or perhaps with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam with the GERD, that it would change the calculus there.
You did mention the issue of the dam that's being constructed in Ethiopia, which has been a source of ongoing disagreement between Ethiopia and Egypt, and Sudan has also been part of that. So what's your assessment of what conflict in Ethiopia, what sustained conflict in Ethiopia means in that regard?
My concern would be that the negotiations that would need to continue in areas like the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, disputed area between Sudan and Ethiopia, that is now space that is not being addressed. There are crises that are not being addressed. I also think that the calculus from other countries, there is a risk that other countries may look at Ethiopia's internal focus as an opportunity to take something, whether it be a military action or stronger political action, when Ethiopia is not credibly able to either continue operations or negotiation.
Is that a real possibility from where you sit? Military action?
Yeah, I'm not sitting in Egypt or Sudan. I'm sitting here, and from my perspective here, I would always be concerned about the calculus for any nation as crises evolve. I would hate to see a circumstance where another nation would think that this would be an appropriate time for a kinetic strike, as an example, on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, because of the crisis that this would occur for humans downrange of the dam in Sudan, and the further destabilization of relationships between nations that we will all want to see have cooperative relationships.
Now, as diplomatic efforts to resolve the ongoing conflict in the northern Tigray region of Ethiopia continue, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will make his first official trip to Africa next week, visiting Kenya, Nigeria and Senegal. Mr. Blinken gave this statement on Ethiopia ahead of the visit.
One path forward is out-and-out conflict, which could lead to the implosion of Ethiopia and spill over into other countries in the region. The other path is to halt all of the military actions that are currently underway.
Well, in the last hour, the BBC has been speaking to the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia, who gave this reaction to the escalating tensions in Ethiopia.
I believe in due course there will be some kind of solution. I'm not sure what's going to be, because it's just developing, but so far we have just little progress, if there is. The international community is pushing a wrong partner. These are not warring parties. These are not parties in conflict. One is elected government, and the other is a rebel to overthrow elected government.
Now, in Sudan, the deposed civilian leadership has rejected a new transitional ruling council set up by the leader of last month's coup. On Thursday, General Burhan appointed himself head of the council. Salina Bill has more from Khartoum.
Huge demonstrations are expected to take place in Sudan tomorrow in protest of the military coup that was staged last October. Pro-democracy groups have been calling on protesters to show up in large numbers to send a clear message to the army. They want to have their civilian government back. On the 25th of October, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, dissolved the interim civilian government and took over power. The head of this government, Mr. Abdullah Hamdouk, is still under house arrest here. And there have been mediation efforts between Mr. Hamdouk and General Burhan, but so far they haven't been successful. What's expected to give tomorrow's protests even more momentum is the fact that General Burhan has already formed a sovereign council, a ruling council that consists of 14 members with himself as head of it. This comes despite growing public anger, rising international pressure on the military rulers to try and find a way out of the current deadlock. But so far, General Burhan seems to be ignoring all of that.
Salina Bill there. Well, as the COP26 climate conference draws to a close, people have acknowledged the fact that many Africans, both at home and abroad, have been doing their own bit to combat climate change. One person who's decided to do his bit through music is Shawaz Jallow from Sierra Leone. Let's have a listen.
My name is Shawaz Jallow. Some people call me the Afro-pop king. I wrote this song to inspire people, to encourage people to plant more trees and look after our environment. Coming from Sierra Leone, I have seen firsthand how climate change affects people. A few years ago, we had a massive mudslide, and that left a lot of people losing their lives, losing properties. We have to look after our environment to prevent such global activities, such disasters.
Let us plant more trees for the children's future.
The young beautiful girl that you guys are looking at here is my daughter, my lovely daughter called Mariama. While we're living in, we need to look after this world for the future of our children.
The nature of the world is beautiful and lush, but the wind can blow it over with just a flush.
I think it's important for children to be in the fight against climate change because, children have really good imaginations and they might have new ideas that no one's thought of. It's important to send this message to people because we need trees, not only just for oxygen but for food.
And that's Focus on Africa for now. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.